My name is Shane, and I'll be refuting Jaime's claim that high-protein diets are safe for the human body. He supported his claim by saying that high-protein diets help in weight management, that they reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease, and he gave some examples of native cultures that thrive on high-protein diets. For his first point, I'd like to read a quote from Catherine Zaradsky, who is a dietitian at the Mayo Clinic. For most healthy people, a high-protein diet generally isn't harmful if followed for a short time, such as 3 to 4 months, and may help with weight loss. However, the risks of using a high-protein diet, usually with carbohydrate restriction, for the long term are still being studied. Several health problems may result if a high-protein diet is followed for an extended time. While high-protein diets will aid in weight loss, especially over the short term, the risks of cutting carbohydrate consumption in place of proteins over the long term have not been studied very well. Cutting carbs reduces the amount of water in the body and you'll be lighter, but that doesn't equate to being healthier because the weight loss is not visceral fat. Some high-protein diets may be low in dietary fiber and cause inflammation of the intestines. And this goes to show that high-protein diets are not necessarily healthy, even if they can help a person lose weight. The second point I'm refuting was that a high-protein diet reduces the risk of cardiovascular disease. This quote is taken straight from the American Heart Association. The American Heart Association doesn't recommend high-protein diets for weight loss. Some of these diets restrict health foods that provide essential nutrients and don't provide the variety of foods needed to adequately meet nutritional needs. People who stay on these diets very long may not get enough vitamins and minerals and face other potential health risks. Furthermore, from the same AHA article, most Americans already eat more protein in their bodies than their bodies need, and eating too much protein can increase health risks. High-protein animal foods are usually also high in saturated fats. Eating a large amount of high-fat foods for a sustained period raises the risk of coronary heart disease, diabetes, stroke, and several types of cancer. People who can't use excess protein effectively may be at a higher risk of kidney and liver disorders and osteoporosis. Depending on the composition, mostly involving saturated fats of the diet, high-protein diets can actually increase the risk of coronary heart disease and other cardiovascular complications. This refutes the claim that HP diets decrease the risk of cardiovascular diseases. And my third refutation to his secondary claim that native cultures thriving on high-protein diets supports his claim that high-protein diets are healthy. I said that the argument that Alaskan natives are less likely to develop cardiovascular complications during their lifetime is not supportive of the main claim, because it does not account for several factors, including genetic predisposition and shorter life expectancy. Because of this lack of data, the information should be ruled inconclusive and cannot be used to represent the health benefits of high-protein diets. In conclusion, I don't think that that his last secondary claim supports his main claim.
All right, structurally everything's in good shape. On the first point, you go right to the evidence. I do think you have a tendency here to let the evidence make the argument. You want to make a declarative statement first, then use the evidence to support that position. In the long run, basically it comes down to the notion that there may be risks associated with a high-protein diets and that we don't really have sufficient information at this particular point. So I think those ought to be the counterclaims that you're presenting, and then plug the evidence in on those points. The risk of not having, the risk of cutting carbohydrates There's a general statement about some problems with whether or not people would have enough water in their diets, or there was also an argument about potential inflammation of the intestines. I didn't really hear any data there. It just sounded like it was a general statement about what some of the complications would be, so there's no source attributed there. I don't doubt that what you're saying is probably true, but let's go ahead and make the argument and provide the documentation on that particular point. The transition to the second point was relatively clear. I think that you could get a little bit more mileage out of the notion that the source that you're citing is the American Heart Association, and you can contrast that data to the information that the advocate presented. That's where I think you need a little bit more analysis of the advocate's evidence and reasoning on these points. You've got good counterclaims on these points, and I think that you have good qualifications on the sources that you're citing on those points, but your argument would be stronger if you can contrast it to the argument that was being presented by the advocate. The third point is basically a relevance issue, and I think that you ask a reasonable question. I do think that there might be some way to demonstrate that the relevance, that there are, for instance, genetic differences between people in those cultures and the rest of us in some way, shape, or form. That seems like it's a presupposition as opposed to something that's demonstrated, and I think you could probably find some information to back that up. I will mention, one of the things we didn't talk about in my public speaking classes, I always talk about those kinds of things. When you're delivering a speech, you want to avoid as many distractions as possible. You want to give yourself a credible ethos. I kept sitting there looking at your shirt thinking, would this apply to that earlier speech, that was going on there? And it just kept popping in my head every time I was trying to listen to an argument. I'd look up and there's that big old doobie sitting there on your shirt going,
I don't know what you're talking about.
light me up, yeah.